end of March, beginning of April, she had a light bulb moment. And so when we did our focus review the last 3 weeks before STAR, she really got in there and followed all the things, and it worked out and it was in her favor. And so her data ended well. And so she was ready to go for that next year and continued to grow. I'm proud to say that last year she was the campus teacher of the year and was my top. When I left there, she was one of my top reading teachers.
That's Dr. NaTasha Crain, Assistant Superintendent of Curriculum and Instruction at Marshall ISD. She took Jones Elementary from a rating of D up to a rating of B. The culture score also jumped from 4 out of 100 all the way up to 98 out of 100. Relational intentionality, not systems alone, drove that transformation.
We went from a 4 to a 98, from a D to a B rating. It was just really staying true to your goals, really being intentional about our goals and monitoring those goals and making those adjustments along the way.
In this episode, you'll learn why putting systems over relationships can crater campus culture, how shared leadership and modeled vulnerability moved one school forward, and why the one thing coaching model builds teacher capacity one skill at a time. I'm Dr. Matthew Flippen, and this is Transformational Educators. It's so great to have you. I mean, your leadership journey is one that really offers practical wisdom for educators who are working with, real challenges in schools. And so I know we're going to get to hear a little bit about your experience and how you grew during that time and how you served and took your team together to a different level. So I'm really excited to hear about that. If it's okay, let's start at the moment when you arrived at Jones and just was this your first principalship, and what was it like, when you got there?
So yes, it was my first principalship. It was the first time that I really had an opportunity to step into elementary. The previous years, I was always in secondary, serving as a classroom teacher. I taught high school English. I was a middle school assistant principal. I worked in curriculum and instruction. All of that experience was mostly geared towards secondary. And so when the opportunity came to be the principal at Jones Elementary, there were several things that took place, when I got there. They had just come out of being a failing campus. So they were right there on the edge that previous year with the previous principal. But there were many broken systems. I didn't have any of those systems. I didn't have a handbook. Started out with $88 in the activity account. So I pretty much started with nothing. And so it was all on myself. I had a new AP, which was also new to being an assistant principal. And I had a completely new leadership team. So we were still in school improvement. So I also had a rep that was coming in and helping us look at our goals and work on our TIP plan and make sure that we were implementing that so that we could continue to grow. So there were just a lot of challenges I think I had. It's a very small school. The capacity is like 425. So that left about 27 to 30 teachers. And when I got there, I had 14 vacancies.
Oh, goodness. Okay.
It was like mid-June.
Okay. That's not a lot of time. So, I was just going to ask, how are you received by the staff when you arrived? But it sounds like you were received by half the staff, and then you brought in.
The 5 people that were left loved me.
The 5 people that were left, and then you hired everybody else. Okay. Well, that in first principalship, that must have been a wild summer.
It was a very wild summer. It was a sleepless summer because I was so determined to make that school successful. Fortunately, I had some of the older siblings, and I've had some experience with those families because of where I was coming from as an assistant principal. So that was something that was on my side, was that I felt like I immediately had some community and parent support. And so that was huge for me to just really, hone in on that and ask them for their help.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So you got to August, you arrived in August. Were you able to fill most of those positions and start with a full team?
I was able to start with the full team. I did get all those positions hired. And we just hit the ground running.
At the instructional level, when because I'd like for us to kind of focus a little bit on that today. What did you see as the challenges, maybe in how instruction was being delivered, or just where the students were compared to where you knew they could get to?
Well, as I said, there were significant gaps in achievement. They were, just coming off being a failing campus. They were literally right there on the edge. And so with that, once we started digging into the data, we saw that there were students that were 2 or more grade levels behind. And so with a new staff, many of them were first year teachers as well, as you can imagine, hiring in the summer. Um, that was an opportunity for me to cultivate what I wanted the instructional practices to look like. And as a new teacher, when you're new, you don't know a different way. You're not setting your ways. So it was a great opportunity for me to cultivate something great at Jones Elementary that was really catered to the students, to the families, and to the community. And then when we looked at instruction, it was a great opportunity for us to utilize some type of intervention measure. And so with that, like I said, I started with no handbook, no schedule. The first thing that we created in our master schedule was an intervention block to happen daily. And so that is something that we really utilize to close those achievement gaps and really shore up our tier 1 instruction. So in the classroom, we're teaching solid tier 1 instruction, but if you have students that are 2 or more grade levels behind, then what is the strategic intervention measure that you're going to take to ensure that those students not only get that solid tier 1 instruction, but they're also catching up and closing their achievement gaps. And so we looked at resources that we were using for intervention. We revamped some of those resources and really focused in on those students that we were targeting during intervention, and really had an intentional schedule that we were using for intervention for reading and math.
Wow, wow. For reading and for math. So, and just for context, what percentage of children were 1 or 2 levels behind, roughly?
I would say probably, over 25% of those students. And specifically when you look at the accountability grades with grades 3 to 5, I would say closer to 30% of those students were 2 or more grade levels behind.
Okay, that's a significant number. I mean, that's a significant amount of time. And so setting aside this specific intervention period, time block, and then recognizing it and acknowledging it. Sometimes educators can look at those statistics and feel kind of hopeless, right? I mean, oh my goodness, so many are so far behind, we're never going to get there. How did you address that or overcome that?
I'm a person that really likes to set goals. I set long-term goals and short-term goals. And I also, as a leader, I know it's important to stamp success. And so as a group, we took on that challenge of, where do we want to be? Well, we want to be at the top. We want to be number 1. Realistically, where can we land? And so at the end of this year, where do we land? And then along the way, what are the small steps that we're going to take to get there? And so every 3 weeks, it was coming back and really monitoring, okay, if this is our goal, how close are we? How are we really looking at each individual student? Fortunately, with only 400 students, and then when you look at the accountability grade levels in grades 3 through 5, some years out of the 7 years that I was there, it was looking at less than 100 kids. So that's great that you can really focus on those individual students, but it's also knowing how to play the game, because if you have 10 students that aren't making the mark, then you fail. And so the pressure is on. It's a great thing because you're so close knit and you're able to build those relationships. You're able to get to know those individual students. But the stakes are high, because if you don't make that movement with so few students in this accountability game, then unfortunately you don't win. And so helping my staff, helping the teachers understand, like, now you can't put 5 students in the corner on the iPad. Like, that can't happen anymore, because if we lose those 5 students, then we lose an accountability. And so really helping them to understand that each student counts. And so we called it win time is what I need. And so students even became involved in looking at their goals and setting their numbers. And so we called it a magic number. What is your magic number for you to grow each year? And so I need your magic number plus 5. And so, everybody had their number. We communicated that with parents, like, there's 45 questions on the test. In order for your student to be successful, they don't have to pass it per se or be on grade level per se, but they have to get 27 questions right. And they're like, out of 40. So then it became doable. Oh, I only have to get 23 questions right. Well, actually 28 because I need 5 more. Um, but that became realistic for them. And so really having that growth mindset of like 100 is not the goal, but growth is definitely the goal. And so if you can make that growth mark, then you will be successful.
That's incredible. That's incredible. So it sounds like you had some routines of checking in. Tell us a little bit about that. Just how did you distinguish between when there was kind of surface level instruction going on versus like the real strong instructional practices that you wanted to see? How'd you know that?
Over time, we worked with our service center, Region 7 Service Center, and we became involved in their Texas Instructional Leadership. We also became involved in lesson alignment and formative assessment. And I think once we took on that structure, routine, and that protocol, that's when we saw the needle moving because it allowed us to be strategic with how we were, first of all, building teacher and leadership capacity. And then from that, of course, as your teacher capacity increases, then that's when you really can move into successful student outcomes. And so with following that lesson alignment and formative assessment, it really is about tier 1 instruction. And so your lesson objective is aligned to what you're actually teaching. So what you have, is that actually what we're seeing in the classroom? So what you have written as your learning objective or your learning target for today, when we come in your classroom, is that actually what's happening? And then the assessment piece is how are you assessing each day to check for understanding? And so is then your objective aligned to what you said that you're testing them over to check for understanding? And so just having that clear protocol for them and moving the needle a little bit at a time. That was our strategic way of making sure that we not only built teacher capacity, but we were also able to see students grow. And so for a new teacher, I really want to see all the things, of course. But then when we kind of break that down and say, can you just at least write a great learning target? And so let's think about that learning target. And if you were executing that, what does that one thing look like? So if you're going to check for understanding, what is the one question that you can ask by the end of the lesson that will let you know if students are mastering it? And so once we got into that routine, then that is what also strengthened our intervention, because now we know each day what students are mastering those learning targets and what students are not. And so based on that, that is another piece that we added to intervention. So we are being very strategic with knowing where they're landing with our tier 1 instruction and how to go back and reteach and provide those intervention measures, as well as using certain programs, whether it was MAP or iREADi, or back in the day, we also used Star Renaissance. And so using those diagnostic and prescriptive programs helps close those achievement gaps where those students may be, more than 2 grade levels behind. And so it's a very strategic process of how do you close those gaps and how do you make sure that the current information that you're teaching, that they're also able to master that. And so it requires a lot of conversation, it requires a lot of planning, and it requires a lot of data analysis. So there's never a time when you're not letting data really guide your decision making and helping you determine what are the next instructional steps.
Hey educators, I hope you're enjoying this conversation. At Graceland University, we believe real change in education starts with compassionate leadership and practical support. That's why we share stories like this. If something in today's episode spoke to you, maybe about your purpose, your next step, or how you can make a bigger impact, I invite you to explore how Graceland walks alongside educators through degree programs and strategic partnerships. Scan the QR code on screen or follow the link in the show notes to learn more. Now let's get back to the episode.
NaTasha, there is so much brilliance. I hear just the professional level at which you led this, I'm wondering if you had perfect alignment and understanding among your staff. And if not, how did you coach them? What that feedback loop look like just on a personal level?
Well, I think the first thing is that you have to have a culture of wanting to be coached and wanting to learn and wanting to grow. And so I can't leave out the fact that we did a lot of things that to build culture to get to that point of being able to coach teachers and having them to be vulnerable to see like when we're coming in, really utilizing that coaching model, because as they're looking at me as the principal or the leader, then they're automatically thinking like, this is an evaluation. This is going to determine whether I can stay here or be here. And so really utilizing our professional learning communities, our PLC processes to facilitate and build that culture of trust, first of all, and that culture of vulnerability. And so practicing some of those things in PLCs with adults, very uncomfortable, very uncomfortable, but getting them to the point, because if we all have the same goal of wanting our students to be successful, wouldn't it be better to make those mistakes or clear up those misconceptions in front of us as adults and we work through it rather than you go in the classroom and further create gaps with kids?
So this was like role play. Is there a specific example that comes to mind? I'm sure it's most uncomfortable when you first do it, and then hopefully it gets better over time. Is there an example that comes to mind when you're thinking about that?
Well, I think the first thing is when we first started, and I modeled. So, it was a lot of me at first because I'm also having my leadership team come in and watch and build their capacity. So a lot of that was on me. And although I felt like I was a pretty decent teacher, it's still a lot of pressure to get it right because I'm then wanting my teachers to execute it right. And so I did a lot of modeling in PLCs, and the easiest thing to me was just having them like, how do you open a lesson? Yeah, how do you open a lesson and really make sure that you are communicating that learning target? We know it's on the board, but it's not on the board for me. It's on the board for your students. And so that was something very basic and simple that I modeled, and that was the most terrifying thing to some of my teachers because they actually had not opened their lesson with stating that today we're going to do this, or by the end of the lesson, you should be able to do these things, and really stating that objective and breaking that down for students. Because the other part is when we come in and watch and coach and observe, we want to ask the students, what are you learning today? We don't want to know what worksheet you're working on. We want to know what you're learning. And so getting to that point really took about a semester of work. However, as we got better with it, we saw the data, the needle moving on our data. And so once you're able, again, to stamp the success, then that helps people to be a little bit more vulnerable and to really see that, this is really working. And so, the goal is, can you do one thing? Can you master this one thing? So now that you've mastered that and you have that in your tool belt, let's move on to the next thing. And so really having them to come up and for, first of all, me modeling it, and then them coming up in PLCs and modeling it, it was a little unnerving at first. And, I'm like, I really like to have fun, and I'm a jokester. People think I'm very serious, but I'm like, we have to laugh about some of these things. And I'm like, did you just hear what you said? And we all laugh about it, and I make a mistake, and I'm like, that didn't make sense. So, to help me, and I would be vulnerable because I tell everyone, like, I'm not a math person. So I might say something in math, and I'll say, what did that even mean? Like, tell me, what did I even say? Because, and they help me understand. And so they all say that it is about all of us learning and growing. I may not be an math expert, but you can help me, but I can tell you what good instruction looks like. And so really understood that we were all working together.
Yeah, I mean, just to highlight a couple of things that you said that are so important. I mean, one, it starts with trust and relationships. So you've got some foundation to build and be consistent about it. And then this path towards vulnerability, because in using the term coaching versus evaluating is real intentional and very, very necessary. Lots of research on don't evaluate me because then I'm super anxious. But if you're coaching, which is a form of helping, right, helping us work towards the goal, then yeah, I won't be as anxious. But then the fact that you still have to be vulnerable. And so adults, it's funny to think that I can talk in front of children all day long and I have no anxiety about that, but put me around some other adults and now I'm having stage fright. And so the fact that you went first and were vulnerable, I mean, that I can picture, the math topic coming up and you're like, okay, well, I'm going to do it. And you know you're going to do it wrong in some form. And yet that you making a mistake now gives permission to the rest of your team to make mistakes because they see that you're going to joke about it and in a loving way, and everybody's going to be able to get better because they're getting helpful coaching. And you said it's only a semester later and you started to see the movement. Was that right?
Right. And I think really being transparent, because I am the evaluator. So really having like even down to a schedule of, these are the things that we're coaching you on. And so for the next 3 weeks, when we come in your room, these are not evaluations. These are coaching observations. And then we're going to come back. And I said, so when you see me, for example, it was somebody that I'm the evaluator. I'm like, when I come by myself, then I'm probably giving you a walkthrough. But as long as I have an instructional coach with me, or, I have another teacher with me even, then these are all coaching moments. So it's okay to mess up. You don't have to be perfect. You are going to get some feedback over it, but that's not going to be part of your evaluation. And so really having that transparency of communication is something that's also very important.
Totally true. Totally true. Yeah, I completely agree. So I know there's a great outcome that happened. I want to be sure that we get to talk about that. So you came in, had just come off of failing, is that right? But still right on the edge.
Still right on the edge. So first year we maintained, and then the second year it all fell apart. So the second year, we received a D rating. So we were back to a failing campus. We also had organizational health index ratings that we received that gave us a score about our campus culture. And so the correlation of that is if you have a healthy campus culture, then that correlates to how students are performing. Well, that is on a scalable 0 to 100 as well, just like accountability, the A through F rating. So not only did we get a D, but the OHI rating was a 4 out of 100. So it really took a turn. It was a 4.
And I know, I can't imagine how you felt when you saw that.
It was the most devastating thing. Like I've never failed anything. And so we gathered as a team, my leadership team, we gathered. And then I also had an OHI team on campus that would help me with the pulse of the campus and, morale. And so very strategic with how I set that team, because I would say this is the honesty room. And so I need to know the pulse of the campus. I perceive it one way because I know the work that I'm doing. Not my work and the outcomes are two different things. So I need you to really tell me the outcome of the work that we're doing, and really got that team together. And, they're like, no, this is not a 4 campus. A 4 really means that there's chaos and, and we had systems, we had routines, we had all of those things. But it's also about getting the right people in the right seat. So I would also make sure leaders understand that you could be doing the right things and you can have systems in place, but if you don't have the right people that have moved from buy-in to commitment, then sometimes that's not the outcome. And so that is pretty much what we had going on at Jones that year. We didn't have the right people. And as I said, it was 13 or 14 vacancies. So over those 2 years, starting to figure out those people that may be, they were hired initially may not be a good fit, because we spent a lot of time developing a student profile. Like, what do the students here what do they look like? What do they need? And then, really stuck to that. So if this is our student profile and we're saying that this is what our community of learners need, then we also need an educator that can meet those needs. And so there were a lot of crucial conversations within that second year. And so with that, there were some that were not happy and really needing to figure out if they were in the right seat of helping us move the needle. And so, from that 4 OHI rating and that D, it really shaped me as a leader because it made me self-reflect. It made me be even more transparent and even more vulnerable because I really wanted that campus to succeed. I wanted the community to succeed. And so it was a 3-year journey.
Yeah. So, I mean, when you look back at that, I mean, what were the, 1 or 2 areas that you felt like you needed to grow the most? Because I know you felt responsible for this. What did you identify and start to?
Well, for me,
work?
on a personal note, as a leader, every survey that I've taken, I have always been task over people because I'm just so like I want the job done, and so it really made me intentional about ways that I'm building relationships, ways that I am able to show empathy and balance that empathy with having high expectations. And so it really made me look in the mirror and say, perception is reality. Although I'm going to give myself grace and know that that may not be my intention, but the perception of how it came out is the reality. And so if I don't want that perception, then as a leader, I have to change. I can still have those high expectations, but then how am I being intentional about building those relationships? How am I being intentional about making sure that people feel heard? And really, it shaped my view on the importance of sharing leadership. And one of the things I always tell, whether you're a teacher, an aide, like you lead where you are. And so it really helped me understand how to build leaders among leaders going through that because I needed everybody's help to make Jones be what we said we wanted it to be.
Was there a specific practice that you implemented that helped with that?
Well, one of the things that we really talked about as we built that student profile was looking at all of the data points, not just instruction, but we looked at discipline and behavior. And that is really where we start to see a change in our culture because as we were talking about discipline and looking at data points, what do these students need? Do they need a punitive consequence or do they need to be taught? And so that really started us moving into social emotional learning and really understanding the social needs of students to help them behaviorally so they can succeed academically. And with that, we also had a moment of adult SEL. And so what do we need as adults? And it really based on all of our background, our previous experiences really affect how we then in turn communicate and the decisions that we make as adults. And so it was just a great opportunity to build relationships as well as just a little bit of self-reflection and self-improvement overall. And so it wasn't necessarily that I was looking for teachers that came from the same communities as the students at Jones. It was more so about, do you understand? And so culturally relevant teaching was something that we also incorporated with social emotional learning. And so what does that look like for a student at Jones with this background? How do you help them self-regulate? And how do you help them understand behaviors in a traditional classroom setting that are so different from behaviors that they experience at home? And so we really took the time to teach behaviors of what we wanted to see in a traditional classroom setting. And we took the time to get to know the families. And so that parent and family engagement piece was also huge because we just invited community in. I would do coffee and conversations with Crain, and community members could come in, parents could come in, and there was no specific agenda. I took some time to express, what we told them, was our campus goals. And from there, it was, now, what do you want to see happen? What are some things that you notice from the outside looking in that maybe we can help with? And how do you feel about the teachers? How do you feel about the adults here in the building? Do you feel like we are nurturing and that we're caring? And what are some things that we can do? And so it was a lot of work because a lot of the things that they wanted from us or that really helped had nothing to do with how teachers were standing up delivering lessons in the classroom. It was about helping them provide basic needs, school supplies, clothes, anything, you name it. And so donating, working with community and getting Thanksgiving dinners, or working with other community aspects and helping them find housing. I did a job fair. In addition with my career fair, I also did a job fair for a couple of years and had the Texas Workforce Center come to my building as opposed to them being located on the other side of town. And I'm like, here's the deal. If you all come here, I need you to guarantee 10 jobs on the spot for me. Like I need you to give 10 of my family's jobs today. And so those were the things that made a difference because they really saw that this was a school, but it was also a community. And so if, they're on board and we're providing what you need at home, the very least you can do is make sure that your child is coming here ready to learn.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, just to highlight it one more time, because I've never heard someone say that specifically. You had a job fair, which that's not uncommon, but the job fair was to help find jobs for the parents of the children and to show how committed you were. And the jobs weren't with the school district necessarily. They were jobs available in the community through the Texas Workforce Commission or whatever. So that is a beautiful idea, and one that cost some time and some commitment, but didn't cost any real dollars to do that. What an incredible signal to send of caring and concern. So I love that, among all the other things that you've shared. So NaTasha, take us through the change that happened, because somewhere in this story,
there's a great ending. There's really a great ending. So like I said, it was 3 years of work. And within those 3 years, it was also amongst COVID. And so that is another reason that it may have taken longer than what we anticipated, because, there was a brief pause of school during COVID. And so, but we never stopped working over those 3 years. We stuck to our goals and revisited those goals. And so over those last 3 years, of course, we kept that D rating. But when we look at the data, we were constantly growing. So, once we got in full swing, 2021-2022 school year, we were really at about a 75 rating. We were at a solid C, even though, there were no ratings when we looked at our data. And so the end of 2022, when the ratings came out, we moved from a D to a B. We did continue those OHI surveys. So we went from a 4. The next year we made a 70. And then once we got into the 70s, my OHI team was like, we need to be in the 80s. And so we got into the 80s. And then that year that we received our B rating, our OHI score was a 98.
Whoa.
And so
that's incredible.
So we went from a 4 to a 98, from a D to a B rating. And it was just really staying true to your goals, really being intentional about our goals, and monitoring those goals and making those adjustments along the way, and doing the work that we needed to do as adults to be more collaborative, and instead of working in silos, so that, the more that we were more codependent on each other and working together, then we saw how well the students, they also grew.
That's incredible. Thank you for sharing that. I know that was a hard journey, but I know that your diligence, prayers, tears,
Yes.
paid off. Is there in that journey, and on the other end, when you started seeing success, is there a story about the impact that had on a specific child or staff member that really touches your heart when you think back on it?
Well, there's so many students that I just can't name one over the years, because 7 years is a long time to be a building principal. So, you have seen students from kindergarten to 5th grade, and just their growth and really learning their families. And like I said, I had the advantage of some of their older siblings or at the middle school. So just really being a part of that family for a very long time. People ask me how many kids do I have. I'm like, well, this year I have 388. Next year I might have 413. They were just really I felt like they were my kids. And so I would tell them, they're like, you're mine. And so I want the best for you. Just like my own child, I want the very best. And so, there are going to be some growing pains and you're not going to like the things that I'm telling you all the time. But when we get to the end, you'll see, why. You'll understand the why. I'm telling you why, but you can't really see it. And it's the same thing with teachers. The teacher that really sticks out, a teacher that I hired, she had been a substitute teacher well over 5 years, just subbing in a neighboring district. And she decided she wanted more. She wanted to do more. And so I gave her a chance. I really, our student profile and the size of our campus, I really tried my best to hire highly qualified teachers from the start, just because time was of the essence. But she was near finishing her student teaching. She was near finishing her alt certification. And I gave her a chance because one of the things in our profile is, can you manage a classroom? Well, if you've been subbing for 5 years, you can manage a classroom, because that requires a different type of management and skill set when you're not the real teacher. So I hired her as an a reading teacher. She said that was her favorite subject from subbing. And, she had some great ideas of some things that she, as a long-term sub, that she had implemented. Oh, we got in there, and although she was great with classroom management, but we also have to connect that to the data. And so the data was not where we wanted it to be. And so we were kind of at a crossroads. And so I thought about it, and I'm like, she's just so determined. And, we would coach and we would have those conversations. I would point out some things and she would fix most of them, but just some of the things were just not in her tool belt yet. And so it was a conversation with the leadership team. Do we have time to continue to grow this teacher? Or do we say, this is just not a good fit for what we need at Jones to move our data? And so we were at that point where it's just not a good fit. We had gotten, fall benchmark, spring benchmark. Spring benchmark was still not where we wanted it to be. And so we were just there at the end. And it was literally like April. And we walked in there and it was a totally different teacher. We got the results from STAR. It was a totally different teacher. And so I was like, I'm going to take a chance on her again, but I'm going to move her to a different grade level just because of accountability and growth. But when we saw the data and her end goal and her outcomes, it was like that. And that's the great part of seeing light bulb moments as a leader for students and for teachers. All of a sudden, end of March, beginning of April, she had a light bulb moment. And so when we did our focus review the last 3 weeks before STAR, she really got in there and followed all the things, and it worked out and it was in her favor. And so her data ended well. And so she was ready to go for that next year. And it continued to grow. And I'm proud to say that last year she was the campus teacher of the year and was my top. When I left there, she was one of my top reading teachers. She was the top 5th grade teacher, making those moves and moving the needle with the data. She was a teacher that the district wanted to come in and observe. With just 3 years of experience, I mean, her growth was phenomenal because she was committed to doing all the things, and all the coaching that we had done with her really showed that it can happen, with a lot of determination, with buy-in and commitment. You can turn around and really produce something that's going to be great for kids.
I love that. Right on the edge. And then at the last minute had to turn enough of a turn to see the improvement in the children's performance and outcome. So, what an incredible story. Well, and I know that in here you also were awarded the Principal of the Year for the hard work that you had led. I know it was a team effort; those are team awards to me, but still, it recognized you for all that you'd done. Well, NaTasha, this has just been so encouraging and helpful because there's so many specific tactics that you shared that I know that others can follow. And it's an encouragement too that the path to growth isn't a straight line of improvement. It can have some real setbacks. Some you can control and some you can't. I mean, nobody could control COVID. That hurt everybody. But the intentional continuing to work, self-reflect, and then grow, just really amazing. And I just thank you for the work that you did, because in the end, I think about those 400 children that you were serving and how they were served because you and your team continued to get better and better at the craft of educating them. So thank you. Thank you for that. How can our audience follow you and just continue to learn from your example?
Well, I am on Facebook, of course. I'm on social media. I'm on LinkedIn. I try to share some things that I'm doing now in leadership, especially now moving into the assistant superintendent role. I try to share the things that I feel are important with systems and making sure that alignment is happening. So I can be followed on Facebook as well as LinkedIn, just under my name. And I love to have thought leaders and partners and collaborate. So if anyone wants to reach out, LinkedIn is probably the easiest way. Dr. NaTasha Crain, I'd love to chat with you.
Fantastic. Well, thank you. Thank you for sharing that. Thank you for being on today. Well, if you found today's episode valuable, as I did, please share it with a colleague or educator that would benefit from it. If you haven't already, please follow Transformational Educators so you never miss an episode. And until next time, keep leading with purpose and transforming schools into places where everyone thrives.
If today's conversation gave you fresh insight or inspired you to lead with purpose, please follow the show and tell a friend. It helps us reach more educators who want to make a difference. For more stories, resources, and tools to support your leadership journey, visit graceland.edu. Until next time, keep leading with courage and care. If you want to keep learning about transformational strategies in education, click the next video.